I just found out a couple of minutes ago that I would have the pleasure of introducing our good buddy, George Land. George has been a leader here at the Institute for several years, although we haven't seen him for a couple. We're really glad to have him back. I'd like to tell you about the first time that I met him. I was teaching a class here. We didn't have extended springboard at that time. I was asked by Sid Parnes and a couple of others to work with a group in what was called a leadership laboratory. Dean Patton, you were in that group. And Dean Patton said, there's this guy on campus, we ought to get him for an hour and a half to come talk to the group. It lasted 7 hours. Do you remember that? I was hooked. It was based on George Land's famous book, Grow or Die, which he just told me has recently been reissued by Wiley & Son, George. If you have not read that book, you are missing something in your own education. Please make sure that you have a chance to do that. It's almost required reading among my students. The impact of George's work on my own has been phenomenal. I have dealt with this in classes, I have written articles, I have built models and so forth based on the work that he's done. He's been good enough to meet with small groups of my doctoral students at different times, and one of them is sitting here now, who just finished reading his book. And on my campus, George Land is well known. You know, one time when I was at SUNY Oneonta, we had him in for faculty development, and we have some magnificent videotapes of his working with that faculty, and this has become standard for him too. His work here with us at CPSI has always been phenomenal. He led for many years the home base in General Systems. His work now is with Leadership 2000, organization in which he is a partner headquartered in Phoenix. He tells me that 4 years ago he shifted from strategic planning to strategic transformation. It's what you'll be seeing with, which you will be experiencing tonight. He works with executives and boards and scientists. A few of his recent clients are AT&T, IBM, Dow Corning, 3M, Dow Chemical, DuPont, National Association of Credit Leagues. I can't say the 2 Japanese ones, but if you ask him, he'll tell you. What he'll be doing with us tonight is exactly what he does with these corporations, and I'm delighted that we have that opportunity to experience this work. This afternoon, we, meaning the Board of Trustees, had the opportunity to meet with George for about an hour and a half in an intriguing session about his work and its connection with the Creative Education Foundation. And I'm announcing and therefore committing all of us that the board members there agreed that we will take George up on his offer to work with us in the retreat for 3 days to look at visioning for the creative education. Those kind of freebies are hard to find. I really feel so good about that. There isn't a nicer thing to be handed to an incoming president than that kind of opportunity for a board to organize itself. The work that George will be doing with us this evening in the presentation will be followed up tomorrow morning sometime before he has to leave us. It will be announced in the newsletter. We don't know, he and I at least, don't know time or place at the moment, but it will be in the newsletter. I am so pleased to be able to introduce to you this evening, if you don't already know him, and a lot of you do, Dr. George Land.
It's always wonderful to be here. Before I begin, I think I'm going to explain some of the paraphernalia I have on. I have my first leg on the journey of this particular life was as an anthropologist. wonderful Tewa Pueblo Indian named Flea, who's a shaman, bequeathed these to me and said if I ever needed the great power of the spirits of the sky, I should load all my turquoise on. I thought tonight's the night. He also, in his great wisdom, taught me that as you move across this great planet and sample its wonders and give back some of the gifts that it has given to you, that there is one thing you should never do, and that is to follow Einstein. He also added either Einstein or a dog act. I woke up abruptly at 3 o'clock this morning and instantly reached over to my nightstand for a fix. Not the kind you're thinking about. Every time when I go to bed at night, I put a little sign next to my bed, which is a navigational fix. It says what year it is, what town I'm in, what country it is. Because you can get disoriented with the kind of schedule we have. This is the neurologist group from Pakistan, isn't it? It's very nice to be here with you tonight. I got to channel the whole thing. Yeah. 35,000 years ago. Anyway, I noticed that it said Buffalo, and I said, Buffalo? I said, why am I here? Which is a good question. And there are a lot of reasons, and I want to start out this insurrection with some of those reasons. One is because Alex Osborne gave me a little shove in 1954, which when I came back to this country from living with tribes in South America and Mexico for many years, I came to sipsee again in 1964. Sid gave me a little shove. Then 1974, Dean and Dory gave me little shoves. Every time they give me a little shove, it spins me out into the cosmos for another 5 years. And I have to think about it and then come back and report. So this is a major report of the last shove. But I want to warn you, you have a clear and present danger in your midst here, because actually, Sid and B called me, and we had a conversation. At the end of the conversation, this was about a month ago, I put the phone down, and I suddenly realized that I said I was going to be here. And I told my partners and staff about it, and they said, you are kidding. You're going to be in Hakone, Japan with our favorite client, our most important client, and 128 presidents of their companies. And no way can you be in Buffalo. So there you go. Sid is very insidious. And he, in his very gentle way, do these little things, and suddenly you realize you're often spinning in the cosmos. So watch him every minute. What came to me at 3 o'clock this morning was one of those things that said, if not now, when? If not us, who? And so I think tonight I really want to think about something that is an incredible opportunity and challenge, I believe, for sipsee and for all of us. Something, I believe, a challenge whose time has come. I believe timing is really important in this life. And I'll get back around to what that challenge is in just a few minutes. Can we get the slides on, please? Thank you. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. This is a very, very hard kind of an address to give in a way. It's very easy in one respect, very difficult in another. I'm going to really cover an enormous amount of ground in a very short time. Not 7 hours, 6 hours, 34 minutes. I did bring my alarm clock just in case. But we are in a very extraordinary epoch. And it has really just come to my wife and I working together on a book that we're doing now. She's been working primarily in the area that she specializes in, kind of which is history and society. And my most recent specialty is quantum physics. And they have come together with a resounding bang. And we're very excited, to say the least, about what we're beginning to see. And so I want to lay a foundation first of what many of you know as the basic ideas, concepts, and transformation theory. And then I want to build on that to look at where we are today as a civilization and what our epoch really means, I believe, and what it portends for the future, which is very exciting, and what role Sipsee and each of you might have in this period of history we're about to enter. Some of you have seen that before. It's a little illustrative device that I've used for some years to try to talk about how things grow and change. And I'm going to repeat a few things you may have heard before, so those of you that know it can take a nap now. I'll wake you up when this is over. What we see in all of nature, whether it's looking at subatomic particle configurations or how molecules develop or how cells develop or communities or companies or whole societies, are cycles of growth and change that follow very strict kinds of patterns that repeat themselves. And I'd like to go through the basic pattern rather quickly and then come to what it means for us today. And this little chart is representative of growth in one dimension, the vertical axis, and time on the horizontal axis. And what we see that happens in every system is that in the beginning, every system goes through a process of forming itself, if you will, inventing itself. It is a period in which the organism that's growing, the seed crystal is growing, the person is growing, the organization is growing, is reaching out, stumbling around, trying to discover a pattern by which it can connect with the larger environment of which it is a part. And so that jiggly line is a little more accurate than the solid line about what goes on there, because it's kind of crazy. It drives all scientists a little batty to look at the first phase in any system because there is no pattern, and it's better to ignore it, which has been done with great diligence. However, after it's stumbled around for a while and has in fact found a pattern, it shifts gears. It makes a remarkable shift. What's called a phase change shift, step change shift. Changes its behavior 180 degrees. And instead of inventing, it now starts to take that pattern and repeat it, enhance it, modify it, extend it, build it out into the environment. And it does something very interesting at that point, and that is it starts to apply what I like to describe as the law of growth through limitation, which is a very powerful law. You all know people who have a million ideas and who never get it together, right? We run into those people all the time. They stay in the first phase. They just keep bumbling around. They don't ever stop and say, this is it. And grab a pattern and focus energy into the achievement of that pattern. Nature is so determined on its connecting journey that it will take that first pattern that manifests itself and grab it Again, whether it's at the cellular level or the molecular level or the human organizational level. And it will institute automatically numerous mechanisms to protect itself from breaking that pattern, which is one of the more interesting things to look at no matter what system you're looking at. In cell biology, it's the immune surveillance system. With human beings, it's something called the reduction of cognitive dissonance. Organizations invent wonderful mechanisms to keep the pattern intact and to keep things that are new and different from creeping in. You may have experienced some of those yourselves. They're very effective. But there is an envelope of growth in the second phase, and it is critical to the organism, to the growing thing, that that organism be preserved so that the energy can indeed be used effectively to connect the larger environment. And what we see here is a continual process in which the universe, at all levels, is connecting itself at higher and higher levels, that is, more deeply, more broadly, and in more interpenetrating ways. But the system has to change. And if the system succeeds, it does, in fact, go into the third phase, which is a period in which those things that were left out start to be integrated into the system. The system starts to become whole. And in that process, all the rules change, because now a system that was following norms, standards, procedures, policies, etc., the kinds of things that happen in an organization, now shifts to a constant process of innovation, constant process of breaking the rules. If you'll notice the most recent AT&T service manual, the first page says, when in doubt, break all rules. In the second phase, things are highly structured. In the third phase, they become destructured and restructured. The system comes apart in order to come together at a higher level. And so it goes. And if the system is successful, what happens is part of the third phase begins a new first phase within the parenting influence, if you will. And you have that little blue line coming in. And another first phase begins at a much higher level of connecting with the environment. So you see cycles of growth. And you can take that all the way back to the subatomic particle field level and all the way up to civilization. And we're going to tie both of those together tonight, the two ends of the string. And that's what's gotten very exciting, is to see at the quantum physics level what this means, and at the level of human civilization what it means. One of the great illustrations of this is to look at nature's basic organic cycle, which is cell growth. And it's one of those places where you can look and find so much data that you can just be illuminated continuously about how it works and what the details are. First phase growth, starting about 4.5 billion years ago on the planet, were non-nucleated cells. By the way, this is an example, and I'm not knocking science, because the science has done wonderful, wonderful things for us. But this first phase is kind of an enigma to people who would like linearity. So the first phase, it drove me crazy when I started to study biology because I couldn't find any first phase stuff. I said, it's got to be a first phase. You just don't jump into the second phase. So I kept looking and finally I sat down with a group of biologists at UCLA in 1970. I said, what is happening here? And one of them said, oh yes, I know what that is. Well, what is that? That's called, well, we call that acellular cells. Very interesting. So they slid that one by and moved right ahead. And you see that in your textbooks. There's a little illustration that says this is interphase growth. And then it goes right on into mitosis. Meiosis skips over the good, fun stuff, which is inventing cells in the first place. Well, all that exploratory stuff changed about 2 billion years ago when cells got a nucleus and got that wonderful stuff called DNA, which allows you to repeat a pattern. And they developed a membrane to protect themselves from the environment and any noise out there. And they could concentrate on dividing and multiplying and conquering the planet, which they did with enormous success. I mean, they took over the planet. And if you want world-class champion survivors, they are it. They are like the bacteria that live today. And they live just about anywhere. They live in hot springs. They are found in air samples at 60,000 feet. You know. You find them in the polar ice cap. They're wonderful. And I'm often reminded that their life is fairly simple because they don't even have a grocery problem. They eat rocks. They took over. I have this image that I would love to make a film on someday. I'll conjure it up for you now. And it's a meeting of the board of directors and the management committee of Nucleated Cells Incorporated, Thursday morning, 900 million years BC. And they're saying, we want to consider the 5 million year planet. And you all have heard probably the answer to that, which is 10% more. I hear this lonely little voice in the back of the room saying, well, excuse me, there's something going on out there that I really think we should pay attention to, Mr. Chairman, where these cells are doing things in the bushes, you know. And the chairman says, have no fear. We have been successful for 900 million years. We're going to soon have our billions and million, whatever the hell that is, and celebrate 1 billion years of successful growth. We've dealt with these things before. They're perturbations. They'll go away. Relax, son. Everything's going to be fine. Well, what was happening out there was something that had never happened on the planet before, which is the way of things, and we'll come back to that later. Something was being invented. It's called gene recombination. In some circles, it's called making love. It caught on. And all of a sudden, cell A was getting together with cell B, and they were producing cell C, which went around eating up all the A's and B's. And they produced hybrids. Marvelous, extraordinary synthesis creatures that could do things that none of the other earlier cells could do. If you want to study creativity at its highest level, one of the places to look is at hybridization and how it occurs. And you'll come up with 15 different new techniques on how to be creative, because I can tell you, nature at that level is extraordinarily creative. Just translate DNA to things like sentences and words and phrases, and you'll get it. But that's a wonderful example of this process and how we are constantly encountering things that never existed before. Now, in our own lives, we are looking at a period in history with extraordinary changes going on. You know, it was, I love that cartoon where the editor is sitting down saying, you know, as an author, I don't think you're ever going to make it. You have to make up your mind. Is it the best of times or the worst of times? And that's the way it is. It is the best of times and the worst of times. Just about the time everybody thought we had our grip on the good life, 2 cars in every garage and a chicken in every pot and all that sort of thing, things started getting funny. Very funny, and to some people not very funny. But things started to change radically, and we'd like to talk about that change in the whole scope of civilization's development. The word civilization comes from cities, has to do with people living together, cooperatively in fairly large groups. That didn't happen on this planet until about roughly 14,000, 15,000 years BC. And as usual, you run into a lot of very funny stuff, and it's something that most paleoanthropologists and archaeologists don't like to talk about a whole lot, because somewhere between 14,000 BC and 6,000 BC, there was the process going on of the invention of civilization. And what happened was villages sprang up here, there, the other place died out, just like the early cells. They were villages. was a particular worldview, or paradigm, to paraphrase our earlier speaker. Now, to me, a worldview or a paradigm has to do with how do you look at the world and make sense of it. People, it's very hard to really grab hold of what goes on in the first phase unless you've lived with nomads and hunter-gatherers, and that's not easy to do, and it's a pain in the ass besides. I lived with a nomadic tribe for 11 months and contracted almost every disease known to man, and a few that they didn't know about. But there's this interesting thing that happens there in the mental framework of people in the sense of how they do make sense out of the world. Because what they believe deeply, profoundly, is that spirits make things happen. And the spirits are everywhere. They inhabit the trees, the rocks, the clouds. Themselves, things are possessed. If a tree falls, it's because the spirit decided to fall. There's no sense of chains or linkages of cause and effect. They don't have words like why or because. It's very frustrating to deal with them. You're always trying to drum some sense into their head. When as far as they're concerned, the world is perfectly sensible. It just happens to be their sensibility. About 6,000 BC, something quite remarkable happened. And the first evidence of that was Jericho, where you suddenly have about 3,000 people living together. A fairly complex situation, quite different than the scavenger, hunter, nomads who were out there surrounding them and thinking their spirit thoughts. And all of a sudden, the acausal worldview shifted. And this is indeed what primitive people believe. It's also what their young children believe, because there's a little saying around that phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, which is small systems repeat the history of big systems and vice versa. Children believe this. So if you want to study nomads, study young children. They're just as primitive as anything else you can find on the planet. Just as amoral. You know, primitive people steal from each other. Like, what do they know? They don't know from stealing. Just like children do. They're totally amoral. We have to teach them to be bad. Anyway, about 6,000 BC, people started doing something different. They started to shift the way they related to their environment. And they made a very, very big shift. And what they did was they figured out that you could put some seeds in the ground and that they'd come up, and you could do that regularly, and you could increase the food supply extraordinarily and feed a lot of people, congregate a lot of people together. And you could begin to manipulate your own existence. Big change. Big change. You know, and I look back and think of the people, the incredible creative genius of inventing civilization, because the patterns that came about 6,000 years ago are exactly the same patterns that we have today. Patterns of commerce, religion, government, all the basic patterns were laid down then. And I like to comment that so far the oldest writing, which happens to be a cuneiform tablet that's been deciphered, is a letter, which is fairly unusual. And it's a letter of complaint about taxes. Those things don't really happen. Second phase is the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's absolutely true. People got very good at this business, though, of doing things that had to do with controlling their own destiny. And established a basis for building very, very large communities that could sustain themselves. Now, it's very interesting. And this particular little point, not little point, this is a real big point, so pay attention, lady, please. Because I'm going to come back and ask questions on this one. If you look at the period from 6000 BC to the period right around the life of Christ, 500 BC more or less, you see some very fitful starts and stops. Civilization did not take off like a rocket. And you wonder about that. And it was not until this year that it really came to us what was going on there, and I began to recapitulate my own experience. And one of the things I found that when I was living with agricultural people was that you would ask them why they were planting the seeds, and they'd say, well, to appease the gods. And the seeds would come up, and you'd say, well, why did the seeds come up? And they'd say, because the gods are happy. And you say, no, excuse me, I want you to sit down a minute and let's go over this. You put the seeds in the ground, and the little things come out, and you put some more, and they said, that's very nice. Now, would you put the seeds in the ground to appease the gods? Because they're not interested in causality. They are interested. They carry forward, okay? Even though they are using the technology and getting the results of the new paradigm, they're believing that it happened according to the old paradigm. Does that make sense? You got that? Okay? This was very frustrating to me. At one point, I thought, it would be a really good idea if they understood this jazz. 500 BC, that all changed. The Greeks looked at it and said, what are we doing here? And you know what they came up with? Logic, reason, linear thinking, and suddenly you had the Golden Age, the Roman Empire. What happened 500 BC was the paradigm shift became conscious. And when it became conscious, it's just like creativity becoming deliberate. You could now do something with it that was extraordinary. And extraordinary things indeed were done. And civilization progressed. Now with the new paradigm, 180 degrees different. Now the world doesn't happen to me. I make it happen. Events have a past cause. It's trackable. You can predict. And of course, the crown on that throne was Newton, with the idea that once the universe got going, everything from then on, if you knew the original details, was predictable. Determinism and control. And things progressed apace, and the world got itself together. We call these change points break points. We believe that we are at a break point right now, this connecting journey of ours. And as a matter of fact, we believe we can tell you exactly when the break point happened, which is very interesting, to me anyway. And that was civilization, Western civilization, post-industrial civilization on the planet, entered its third phase on Thursday morning at 11:45, 1776. I asked you to consider something that we just kind of passed by, take for granted. It goes without saying. It's real nice. They teach you in school, you read this stuff. This guy Jefferson sat down and acted for those 17 people, and he came up with this cute little document, and isn't it nice? And you better memorize it or you're going to get rated, which says, something about truths being self-evident. Remember that? Now think about it for a minute. For 8,000 years, you had a seamless continuity of life on this planet where rulers were gods. And rulers were always rulers and peasants were always peasants. And the past and the future were joined inexorably. And now you've got some birds sitting over there in the new world saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Self-evident to whom, I ask you? Who gave them the right to break the rules. Now, what did they do, really? What was in that act of theirs, they did something that's very important to you as a human being right now, here today and tomorrow. And they made a manifesto. And that manifesto said, the future does not have to be like the past. Think about that. You've been carrying 8,000 years of anchors, just suddenly cut them free. And with that liberating act, and then their behavior consequent to it, because the king said, this is damn foolishness, go over and straighten those people out. So they sent the army over, right? And the army, of course, being a second phase regular army, they said, you stand up here in a line, and everybody shoots the other end, you stand. And here you had these nuts getting behind trees, you know, doing all this crazy stuff, you know, they would not follow the rules. And so, of course, they lost. So the guys not only made the point, but proved it. So there were some people standing around at this point saying, that's interesting. Now, to me, these were people standing on the riverbanks watching the seas come up, except they were doing it in a different way. Now, their minds were somehow saying, a fellow named McCormick says, gee, it doesn't have to be like it always was. Morse. I think I could make something that never existed, called a telegraph. Then a little telegraph operator working there for Mr. Morse says, you know, I think I could do some other stuff here that's never been done. His name was Tom Edison. He said, not only can I do some stuff that's never been done, I'm going to create an institution to create things that have never been done. I'm going to create so many of them, they're going to have to have all these patent offices everywhere. And then you get a little patent officer sitting over at Burns-Whittle in 1905 thinking about things, get bored out of his tweet with all these damn patents, coming up with the law of relativity. Big change. You can track the Industrial Revolution. But what was it all about? It was about changing their minds. But it was changing their minds at an unconscious level, exactly in the fashion that human beings change their minds in the first to second phase shift. It was unconscious. But all kinds of discoveries started to now crop up. And I won't go into a long litany of it, but I can tell you that there is not a science that has not been devastated within the last 70, 75 years because they have all fallen off the linear edge. A friend of mine says, you know, that scientists swept so much dirt under the rug that there's no longer any possibility of standing on the rug. It's so lumpy. But all of a sudden, the invisible started to come into play. The invisible mind, the invisible atom, the invisible electrons. Bucky Fuller said, when I was born, everything around me that was real, you could touch, you could sense, you could smell it, you could taste it, hold it in your hand. And now, he said, on the advent of his death, 99% of everything that's affecting our lives is invisible. I mean, things happen to you that are quite dramatic, that are the result of an electron jumping across a threshold in a transistor somewhere in Ethiopia. All of a sudden, nonlinearity was discovered. Disorder was discovered. And people didn't know what to do about it. They got so confused by it, in quantum physics in particular. And for any of you that are students of the history of science, this is one of the more interesting episodes. Quantum physics gets very confusing because you suddenly find a lot of what are called paradoxes that just don't agree at all with the idea of a causal, linear, logical, rational world. For instance, in quantum physics, you can take a whole lot of events, like the decay of an atom or the emission of photons or light, protons, neutrons, and what you discover is that all of these phenomena are totally disorderly. That is, individual events are absolutely 100% unpredictable. And the patterns that they reach are totally predictable. Excuse me? Would you go over that again, sir? Well, you see, the light photons that go from A to B, each one of them behaves independently, but they're all totally unpredictable. But, excuse me, you said that this pattern is always the same. Yes, that's correct. I don't understand. How can you take a large number of unpredictable things and achieve certainty? Well, son, in 1922, we decided in Copenhagen not to ask that question. True, the guys sat down, you know. There were no gals there. I think it would have been different. They sat down and they said, you know, this stuff. John von Neumann, the great mathematician, you know, looked at this stuff and said, this is black magic. And they said, don't do that, John. But Heisenberg and Born and Einstein and Schroeder and de Broglie, all the big cheeses in the quantum physics business got together in Copenhagen and said, since we can't explain any of this jazz, what we're going to do is make it a rule not to ask any more questions. We got the equations, you know, we can handle the mechanics of it. That's why they call it quantum mechanics. They don't call it quantum understanding. They are mechanics. And you can't go get a degree fooling around trying to explain quantum mechanics, let me assure you. I have been a sort of a illegitimate member of the physics community for some years now, and it is, you just don't want to go around normal academic quarters and start talking about the meaning of quantum physics. Talk about the equations. That's okay. Now let me pose a little thought experiment for you. Einstein was wonderful at this, you know, it's the way he did his stuff. It saves a lot of lab costs. I do it, it's a wonderful technique. Imagine that you've got a box of tacks, and little metal tacks, and you've got a table out in front of you. So we're going to replicate the behavior of photons or neutrons or protons or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to toss these tacks out. We got a little hand here that does it at random. So we're going to toss these tacks out on the table, totally at random. What do you think you're going to end up with there on the table? It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a random mess, right? I didn't help. Let's take a great big magnet and put it under the table. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Random, throw them out on the table. Oh, isn't it interesting? They make a pattern. Hey, let's try that again. Now look at what we have. We have a large number of totally unpredictable events, always making the same pattern. What's going on there? Something very strange. The very strange thing that seems to be happening is that the causal basis of what is going on in our universe seems to be much more a function of the future than the past. We are being pulled, not pushed. When Newton did his number, he wrote 22 articles that got him accepted by the Church of England, because pretty soon they worked out a deal that said, look, we got our domain, you got your domain, you call yours science, and you deal with this jazz, and we got this other stuff over here, okay? And Newton knew what happened to Galileo. He remembered that little lesson. And so he said, okay. And so one of the things they split out was something called purpose. And if you how many scientists here have ever studied a course on purpose? Verboten. Those other people deal with that. Philosophers, theologians, the crazies. Scientists deal with the real thing. When you imagine that the universe is guided by a purpose, you suddenly can make sense out of all of the so-called paradoxes that have to do with quantum mechanics. Every one of them resolves itself, the wave-particle phenomenon. Waves and particles are real interesting, by the way. Has anybody in here ever heard of the wave-particle paradox? Hold up your hand, please. There's three of you. Okay, we'll forget that one. That's for in the morning. No, really, let me tell you about it, because it's one of the things that drives everybody crazy, and they'd rather not talk about it, and that is, if you look at subatomic matter, you begin to discover that if you look at it one way, it manifests itself as a particle, which is a discrete object occupying a certain amount of space, having mass, and that's a thing. And you look at it another way, and it's a wave. A wave doesn't occupy any particular space at all. It has infinite extension. Excuse me, one physicist said, I look at these things as waves on Monday and Tuesdays, on particles on Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday I try to forget the whole damn thing. Because how can you have a wave and a particle? Well, it turns out in the first place there aren't any waves, by the way. Waves just happen to be a word used to describe the statistics used, which happen to be statistics that are used to describe waves. Have nothing to do with any waves that ever occurred in anything subatomic. So there aren't any waves. There are just behaviors. And those behaviors have properties like waves. And it's very simple. Case in point. I have this little glass of water. Now let's suppose I'm trying to describe this thing. So I want to describe it as completely as I possibly can. And so I'm going to say, it occupies so much space, certain refractive index weighs so much, etc., etc. Okay, I got all its physical properties, right? Now I go looking for it. ain't no more. Well, is it or isn't it? Surrounding that physical thing are all of its possible futures, which happen to be describable only with the statistics of wave mechanics. And the minute I drank that water, something happened that physicists call the collapse of the wave function. The collapse of the wave function says it has moved from its being state and its possibilities of becoming into a new state of being, which collapsed all of its possibilities of becoming, and all of a sudden, what do you know? It has a whole new range of possibilities of becoming. That's all waves and particles are. They describe the two absolutely necessary properties of anything, and that is it is what it is now and what it might be in the future. That's all it is. Real simple stuff. You don't need any mystical, I hate to say this, but you don't even need Taoism to describe it. It just happens to be reality. If you include time and you stop taking snapshots, which is one of the problems in science. What we're beginning to see that is so exciting to us is that when you look at the properties that go on in these phase changes, and the dynamics of changes, and the understanding now, these days, of what change is about, what do you run into? Very interesting. You ever seen that before? All of a sudden, things that we think about as purely human phenomena, things we think about as purely of the world, of the strange, esoteric world of subatomic particles and fields and so forth, come together. And they tell us that there's this constant oscillation going on in the universe between two states that you could call, if you will, order and disorder. And that oscillation is very interesting because every time disorder occurs, if you follow it, it becomes the basis for a higher level of order. It doesn't make a difference whether you're looking at the crystal growing, or you're looking at cell growing, or you're looking at a school system or human personality. You know, it's like studying great personal transformations. What is the common characteristic that we now see in great personal transformations? Anybody? One common thing stands out very powerfully when you talk to people that have been through great personal transformations. Tremendous crisis, disorder, terror, loss, the existential crisis. Greatest thing that, you know, I've worked with a lot of psychologists now, and they say they just have so much fun because a patient comes in and says, "Oh my God, I'm in trouble." They say, "Wow, how wonderful." Now you can do something. You don't have any problems. You're in real deep trouble. You're mostly probably dead. Higher and higher levels, higher, deeper, broader, more interpenetrating levels of order. What we are beginning to see is that there's only one way to really describe the universe. It's a creative process. At every level. And what we are suggesting is that this is that moment in time for us that is parallel to that moment in time of the Greeks who said, "What's going on here?" And what's going on here is a few individuals here and there in the other place said, you know, things can be different, and they started doing it, but they didn't know what the hell they were doing. It was like that. There's that wonderful gentleman here that was here this morning with the produce. My memory of the names is absolutely wonderful, but short. We were talking beforehand, and I said, you know, what's your success due to? He says, I just love what I do. That's all. That's about all it takes. But what we're seeing is that the creative process and the natural process is first pulled by purpose. That its power comes from purpose. How do you solve a problem if you don't have a goal? Remember Dr. Einstein was talking about goals? Goals are a lot more important than techniques and solutions. Have a goal. Let yourself be propelled by the goal. Moved by it. And let the future become the determiner, not the past. The universe doesn't care a whit for the past. It is immaterial. Really, absolutely immaterial. It goes from the now to the future. Now, I hate to tell you this because it does cast at some level of disrepute certain phenomena that we have grown accustomed to, like guilt and shame and blame and all that jazz, which is fairly popular. Because if you can't go back to the past, what the hell do you do now? Who do we blame it on? You end up spending an awful lot of energy trying to explain. You even stop having to expend energy on explaining your successes. This was a real problem. I went around for years. Sid's done this, a number of people. Frank's done it. Interviewed scientists, artists, so forth, talking to them about their discoveries. And if you really get honest, it's usually after about the third or fourth or fifth margarita. Or Slivovitz or whatever we happen to be drinking, that they say, well, the fact is, one day I was in there and this thing fell over. And I noticed it was acting funny. And it kept acting funny, and I tried it again, and it acted funny again. So then I figured out should have figured this out. We have a client. We have a wonderful, wonderful client. Anybody here from North Carolina? One. We have a client that we work with, which is sort of our real love, which is 4 years ago when we decided we would absolutely go public with this with our clients. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you all what that means. We were taking a certain risk. But with this group, it was a little bank down in a place called Wilson, North Carolina. A little neighborhood sort of bank. They had been in business over 100 years. For 10 years, they've been going steadily downhill. They didn't hold out a lot of hope, because in North Carolina, you probably do not know, it's a strange place, and nobody in the banking business that is not in North Carolina wants to be in North Carolina. Because the banks there make the great white shark look like a teddy bear. Citibank won't touch it. Chase won't go in there. So here's a little neighbor. So what we said is, would you try this business of living in a different reality? Well, not exactly those words. We did an advance together. We don't call them retreats anymore. We went away in the mountains and kind of got into truth and hope and some other things. And everybody said, we'll do it, we'll do it. And they sort of signed off in blood. And they said they got their purpose real straight. They got a vision of what it could be to serve their customers and to help their customers really achieve their goals. And they went to the rest of the people in their organization and carried that vision and helped, and those other people helped them build that vision up. And they set up some new rules in the organization, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And they really started practicing the principles of what I would call a creative worldview. It's been real interesting to watch. They are now a little over 5 billion from 100 million. They're in 180 cities. But that's not the real story. The story is they all look like that gentleman with the produce company. They're having so damn much fun. You couldn't believe it. They're just loving it. And they're feeling good. They're feeling like they have a real, meaningful life because they are serving a purpose that is making things on the planet a little better. And it's exciting to watch that. It is something that keeps us charged up. It's a little bit like coming here to go down there. Some of the implications of this, when you start to practice it, when you start to grab hold of it and say, well, the universe is a good process. How do I grab hold of that? Let me give you a metaphor that we like that came out of the study of autopoiesis. If you want your mind to get a little bent, think about how 60 billion trillion cells in your body work together. 60 trillion. Have you ever tried to manage 6 people? Let's take General Motors, which has been the greatest success in management that there has ever been. Can you imagine the management committee of General Motors running your body? Huh? How about the Chase? How about the post office? Tell me who you would turn it over to. Got any ideas? That's because it ain't managed. It's led. It works on the basis of self-creation and self-organization. The function of management is to provide the envelope in the second phase. That is, the function of management is to limit the potential of a system. 100% we can prove it, no doubt about it. And when you transform a system, whether it's yourself or a company, and transforming yourself, of course, is one of the real fun companies to deal with. You start getting out of your own way and stop managing your life. My mother used to always say to me, remember, you are not the producer. And I just didn't get that for a long time. You know, mothers are funny. They give you these lines, and it takes you 35, 40, 50 years to work them out. And you kind of get out of your way and say, okay, I'm going to let it happen. And what do you do? Well, here's the model I'd like to give you, because it's lovely and it contains most of the real pieces of being in touch, part of the creative process, the creative universe, and that is the navigation model. What do you have to have in a navigation model? One, you got to know where you are. You got to know what kind of a vessel you're in. And I add a little parentheses behind that, which says, really. Okay, so you see a lot of truth there. Who am I? Where am I going? What's my destination? What is my vision? What is my purpose? Okay, so we got that. Know where I am, know what kind of ship I've got here. Know. Now what do I have to do? Now I got to be super aware of my environment. I've got to connect with my environment. I've got to watch the waves and the currents and the clouds and the sky, the icebergs. I've got to really connect. And the better learning that I can do, I can course correct. See, if you do those three things, if you really can learn, that's a creative process. There's no way to fail. There's no way to fail. Now, a good way to fail, if you're a navigator, is to draw up a plan. Ask any navigator, would you make a plan or get from San Francisco to Hawaii and follow the plan? How many times do you think they're going to get to Hawaii? Why? Because the future is unpredictable. Oh, is that right? If you're in an unpredictable world, which is one we occupy, you have to be able to learn continuously and course correct. You have to be able to enter the storm and use the storm to take you where you want to go. That's what a good navigator does. Now, how do you connect with the environment? So we say, okay, look, I got to be honest about who I am, what I am. I got to just stop playing games. Two, I've got to have purpose. I've got to understand and be committed to my purpose. And that purpose would be real helpful if it's in alignment with where the universe is going, because otherwise you tend to go upstream, which means how am I adding to the betterment of the planet? How am I connecting things at higher levels? So you get the purpose, you get totally committed to it. Now you want to connect with the environment. Well, the first thing I can teach you is how to keep you from connecting with the environment. That's easy. What I'm going to do is teach you to know things and to judge things. Because if I can get you with the idea that you know something, then I know you're not going to pay any attention to any information coming in that direction. And if I can get you to judge things, then I can get you to expect things. And be totally smitten when expectations and reality don't match, and so spend an awful lot of time dealing with negative feelings about how they didn't match. Sid has talked about deferred judgment. I want to put out a little challenge to you right now, and then I'd like to follow up with a little slightly larger one. I want you to try an experiment. I'd really, if you try this, if you gave it your all, I think you'd see something happen that you just would not believe. And to a great extent, it already happens here, so I feel comfortable in asking you to try it. And that is, defer judgment, period, for a week. Period. No judgment. See, all judgment comes from the past. The purpose of judgment is to limit your potential. If you can teach a person to have good judgment, you can teach them to hold the line, know their place. Instead, make choices. Choices, decisions, don't depend on judgment unless you don't have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, then you're stuck. You've got to use judgment. If you have a purpose, no problem. As I'm going along, and everything is available to me, and I'm making myself available to it, making choices is very simple, because it's a question of are they in alignment, and what degree are they in alignment with my purpose? That's easy to do, really, and you just sort of glide into it. So I'm saying this experiment won't work unless you first sit down and say, at least for this experience of this week, what is the purpose? What is your purpose? Okay. And then say, there's no good, bad, right, wrong. I'm going to give that up. Now, there's a positive way of stating this condition. And I'll never forget the first time I looked at the chairman of the board of a $5.5 billion company and told him that the most important bottom line principle in business that I knew of was something called unconditional love. It was really a wonderful experience. He got up. He was a 72-year-old accountant. And he rose slowly from his chair. And you've seen those pictures with a bony skeletal hand. And he pointed his hand out at me and he said, "That agrees with everything I have ever experienced." Peter Grace, you know who he is? The longest life chief executive in American industry. The one person that the president selected to head with everybody's great enthusiastic support, to head the Grace Commission. Peter Grace said there are only two things that are important in business. I don't agree with that, but he's pretty close. Awful close. He said the only two things really important: trust and love. The principle this bank is using is love. If you feel bad, I go back, a couple of, when was it, 2 weeks ago? Did you all see the scene in Red Square where President Reagan and Gorbachev were walking along, and somebody asked Reagan, "Do you still believe the Soviet Union is an evil empire?" Remember that? What were they saying? Yeah. We've done a study over the last 4 years, and we found out the source of all pain is withheld love. Now, there's a side benefit to this jazz that I just love. If you do those three things, and you live totally creatively, you get a gold star on your psyche. What do you think you're going to be feeling inside? What else?
Warm. Wonderful. Energy.
Is it kind of pleasant? The wonderful thing that nature did, now think about this. If you were nature and you were trying to design something that would work, you'd do it like we do with the satellites. So you're going to put them out there, give them an inertial guidance system. You got one. It's called their feelings. If you're doing those things, I can tell you right away what you're going to feel. It's something called joy. And you can have it all the time. All the time. 100%. That is, if you do that stuff 100%, you can have 100% joy. Period. This idea that you got to suffer is not it. See, that only works. You only have to sell that idea if you're working with a paradigm that's not too accurate. Because the old paradigm says, I know the past, therefore what I'm going to do is believe the past is going to create the future, so I'm going to put the past out there and I'm going to make it happen, and didn't I tell you so? And it wasn't so hot. Imagine going through a day, imagine going through any day without expectations, but with curiosity and verve and vigor and purpose. Can you get no expectations? See, expectations come out of the past. Expectations are part of the causal deal, part of the package. See? Only way you can limit somebody is to get them to keep expecting stuff. See, the business of the universe is miracles. This here room, this gathering, is a miracle. Your body is a miracle. Hell, your eye is a miracle. Your fingernail is a miracle. The flowers out there are miracles. They can't be causally explained. That is the definition of a miracle. After all, that is the universe's gig. It is in the miracle business. It is in the business of producing what has never existed before and can't be explained by the past. One of the most interesting things about that bank and their success is that they don't, well, people say, God almighty, how did you do that? And they say, oh, yeah, the amount of energy that goes into trying to explain a miracle is not worth it. It is not worth it. You know, so you just save wonderful energy that way. You know, just enjoy the flower, smell it, you know, God almighty, isn't it? What are you going to do next? You know? I am so excited about the reality that the new physics is starting to uncover, and the reality that this place has been pulling out, evoking from people for 34 years. That now I want to toss you the other challenge. And the other challenge has to do, well, if you're really going to be creative, and if you, let's say how many people do you think are actually affected by the network of 34 years of 60s? Would anybody like to figure that out? Any mathematicians got a computer handy? What would you guess? How many people have been touched? How many people have felt the surge of the truth of creativity within them as a result of association with this institution, with these people? Lots, 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 lots. I believe the people that are going to learn to express the creative process, grab hold of the paradigm, are the people who have experienced it. Make sense? It's easy to talk to you folks. Believe me, if I were talking to a group of artificial intelligence engineers, it would not be the same. They're in a different place. I love them, but I would talk differently. See, I have a little motto. I'm getting some bumper stickers made up. You can order them at the office. It's called, they say, peace sucks. Are you real interested in peace? Peace is boring. I mean, you know, what do you do after peace? You know, it's even got a good book in it, you know. Good grief, peace? You sit on, is that where you sit out on the porch in the rocker? Or what? I cannot get excited about peace. It's a little bit like entropy, you know. Who wants it? Who needs it? It was an invention. It's a mythical idea. There ain't nothing at peace. There never has been anything at peace. It doesn't look like there ever will be anything at peace. Why are we trying to get it? When in the first place, nobody's going to enjoy it. Suppose, we said, we live in a creative universe, in a creative planet, with a whole bunch of creative people. And what you could do is have a creative, purposeful piece where we co-recreate this planet. How's that sound? Does that do anything? Could that be fun? To get together with the agents of the evil empire and do some fun stuff together. Like figuring out, you know, how to educate a few million people out there that aren't getting anything, and feed them and help them realize their potential. I believe if this organization, so my challenge to come up with, if this organization really said we would like to be forced to bring about a creative, purposeful peace on this planet, and it galvanized all the resources of all of the people that have been connected with this organization, what might happen? I just ask you to think about it. Let it germinate, incubate in your unconscious. I believe the time to join our planet in a creative process is upon us. I want to get involved. I can't do it, but we could do it. So that's my challenge. It's the last little piece of stuff I would like to lay on you. And in the morning at some point, I'll be around to answer some questions and confuse you ever more deeply if I possibly can. And if you do any applauding on this, do it for yourself, because you're wonderful people and I love you and I'm happy to be here. Very happy. Thank you.